A general analytical framework for the analysis of currencies and other commodities by Warren Mosler and Mathew Forstater. Fiscal Balance. From inception, the state must spend or otherwise provide that which is necessary to pay taxes, and for all practical purposes, the private sector will be willing to obtain more currency units from the state in exchange for real goods and services than the minimum required for its current tax liability. The extra currency units accumulated are called net private sector savings of financial assets, denominated in the unit of account. I have elsewhere used the term HNFA, holdings of net financial assets. This is analogous to the private sector buying more corn from the farmer than just the exact amount of current consumption. If the state or farmer decides not to offer the amount desired by the taxpayer or consumer, there is, by definition, a shortage. Horizontal activity cannot provide for any net accumulation. A collective desire in the private sector can only be resolved in the vertical component. As Moore, 1988, argues, only the central bank can resolve a reserve imbalance. In a similar vein, Keynes demonstrated that, except in the unlikely case of an accident, actual and desired net savings will only be equal at full employment, by design, that is, the state running a budget deficit. This is not to say that horizontal activity cannot effect a change in the desire to net save. For example, a rise in the price of corn on the futures exchange due to a shortage could certainly reduce the desire to net save corn. The corn market may stabilize at a higher price. Such stability occurs when the actual net savings of corn equals the desired net savings of corn. Likewise, a reduction in state deficit spending could result in a deflation that stabilized when prices fell enough for private sector agents to lower their collective desire to net save and make purchases either through spending net savings or incurring new debt. The horizontal component is a leveraging of the vertical component. This implies price sensitivity to supply and demand changes that may originate in the vertical component. Changes in fiscal balance are analogous to changes in the expected harvest or mine output. Changes in taxation are analogous to changes in consumption demand. Fiscal balance occurs only when the state runs a fiscal policy that allows actual holdings of net financial assets to equal desired holdings of net financial assets. With most other commodities, the market is allowed to maintain this balance. Price changes are continuous as inventories rise and fall for the various commodities. The state currency, however, is a case of a single supplier, so we must look to other examples of single suppliers for the more accurate analogy as to the processes that equate actual and desired net savings. An example can be a water monopolist with an unlimited supply and no marginal cost of production. In this case, it would be in an area where there is no other available supply and a sufficiently captive population. Microtheory recognizes that this single supplier of the needed water would set a price for water, and then let the population purchase as much as it desired at that price. A higher price would perhaps lower sales, and a lower price may increase sales, depending on the elasticity of demand. Some of the change in sales would be due to changes in water held in storage facilities, and some due to discretionary consumption, such as bathing. The amount sold and used for drinking, for example, might be less elastic than that sold for washing cars. But in any case, the single supplier of the water would not likely choose an alternative strategy for selling a fixed quantity of water and letting the market decide the price. If it did, it would be very difficult it would be a very difficult situation to manage. Depending on elasticity, fixing the quantity a bit too high could cause a large drop in price, and fixing the quantity a bit too low could cause a sharp spike in prices. And as weather and demand changed, volatility could be high, particularly if desired gallons held in storage facilities were subject to changing hopes and fears. In fact, even if the water monopolist set out to budget the number of gallons it wished to sell and let the market decide price, it would likely soon change policy. A skyrocketing price would likely result in an increase in the quantity offered for sale, and a falling price might result in a decline in the amount brought to market. So in any case, the monopolist would likely end up behaving as a price setter. Only if and when the single supplier status is lost is the position of price setter eroded. In the case of the state as single supplier of its currency of issue, the state is in the position of price setter of its currency. It can unilaterally set the terms of exchange that it will offer to those seeking its currency. Ironically, no state currently seems to recognize this. To the contrary, states act as if they were in competition with other buyers when conducting purchases with their own currency. They believe and act as if they must raise revenue through taxing or borrowing to fund spending. They have chosen the option of setting the quantity of their currency they wish to spend via a budgeting process, and then exchanging that currency at market prices for desired goods and services. Like the water monopolist, spending too much will drive up prices, reduce the value of the currency. And spending too little triggers a deflation, increase the value of the currency. In addition, there is no long-term right amount, as the worldwide desire to net save that currency may be constantly changing, hence a fluctuating Nairu, removing most practical value from the concept. The other practical option for the state, a single supplier of its currency, if it wishes to maintain a market economy, is to administer a buffer stock. Gold has traditionally served this role. The state would set the price at which it would buy or sell gold, and then conduct monetary and fiscal policy such that the buffer stock remained credible. Graham, 1937, long ago proposed that commodities other than gold might serve a similar function. In Full Employment and Price Stability, the option to use labor as the state's buffer stock was presented. Clearly, when administering a buffer stock, purchases made at the designated price are not inflationary. They do prevent deflation below that level, nor are sales from the buffer stock deflationary. Rather, they serve to inhibit inflation.